Times are continuously changing. Not too long ago, a person could progress in their career with minimal qualifications. Professions were more static and traditional, and jobs more secure. Now, with increasingly unidentifiable job titles, demand for specialized skill sets and higher levels of education, and the competition for jobs between both local and international professionals, there is consistent pressure for individuals to have knowledge and skills that will give them the competitive edge in an ever-widening pool of candidates. The modern parent is therefore highly invested in making sure that their children have a fighting chance in this new environment, shelling out thousands for what is marketed as a better education, investing in the latest gadgets and tools, paying for extra tuition and programs, and often exerting the same pressures to perform on a younger and younger demographic. There's also social pressure within different reference groups, as parents compare whose child is reading and writing first, who is performing better academically, and mastering extracurricular activities. Pressure is also exerted by some on educational institutions like daycare centers and nursery schools to have their students reading and writing at an early age. These centers for development then have to balance commercial pressures with their professional duties. Tonight we learn that the understandable compulsion to give your child a leg up over the competition in this current economic climate could actually be counterproductive, hindering your child's development instead of encouraging it. Intense demand on a child to perform above their natural ability can damage their interest in school, their self-esteem, and their natural progression, or from a misunderstanding of the way children are supposed to learn, an underestimation of the importance of play. Apparently, it is more effective to let children be children, to let them learn the world and their capabilities through being mobile, curious, social, and experimental as they naturally desire to be at that stage, growing at their own pace instead of pigeonholing them into rigid, structured forms of education before they are ready to do so. Our featured experts say that a child acquires half of all the knowledge he or she will ever learn during the first 7 years of life. It is clear, therefore, that the development of human capital starts right at this critical stage. If we get it wrong at the foundation, we may be setting up future leaders for failure. Join us as child occupational therapists Mpho Rachel Rabasha and Frida Brambat-Dierwada school us on how to facilitate a good educational foundation for our future leaders. Welcome to First Issues. Welcome back to First Issues. In an increasingly globalized world, parents eager to give their children a competitive edge are placing them in formal classroom settings, expecting them to read and write, sit still and concentrate for extended periods of time at younger and younger ages. Our guests this evening, however, argue that skipping important developmental stages can be detrimental, as it is through these stages of play and experimentation that important neural pathways are formed between all parts of the brain, as well as the brain and the body. And that nursery school age children should be exposed to play and movement to form the foundation, the building blocks, to more formal and structured learning that awaits them at primary school. For example, what may look like fooling around on a swing to the untrained eye is actually the development of a child's vestibular system, the system that helps the child to recognize where their bodies are in relation to other people or objects. Playing on a swing also develops a child's hand and upper body strength, teaches the social skills of sharing and taking turns, and also facilitates the learning of cause and effect concepts, as in, if I let go, I will fall off the swing. Simply scribbling on a piece of paper allows for fine motor development and improves grip. Playing with toys, dressing up, working with beads, and many more activities we take for granted all lay the foundation for skills to be later applied to reading, math, creative skills, and other abilities. With seemingly any Tom, Dick, or Harry allowed to operate a nursery school, the first thing we asked our guests, Frida and Mpo, was whether they think our current early childhood development system is adequately meeting our children's learning needs.
It depends on which schools, and every school does it differently. It depends on the different curriculums they have at schools and the different structures. Some preschools really focus a lot on the play and that sensory experience, running around outside, playing on the playground, whether it's playing in the class using different textures, hand painting, cutting. And some schools are a little bit more into structured sitting, learning your letters and learning your alphabet. But we would really say that between the stages of 2 and 6, it's very, very important for a child to be running around a lot more, to play more, to get all those developmental stages set in the foundation stages before we can sit down and concentrate and do the writing and the reading. But yeah, I know you've come across lots of different schools, and it really is different across every school.
Firstly, it's known that children between 0 and 7 acquire half of the knowledge they have for the rest of their life. So half of what you know now is what was embedded in you between 0 and 7 years. So you can't underestimate the importance of that early childhood and that early intervention. So to have really strong, solid early childhood curriculums in place, I think is a first step. And not just on paper, but actually in practice, which means that in teacher training and in training the teachers that are into nursery schools and all of that, they need to be aware of how a child develops and why it is important for a child to play and learn, because that is their occupation. This is what motivates them, and this builds all those little building blocks that eventually come out and help them into their more academic based activities. So schools and setups and education systems that are still very traditionally focusing on getting your child to read and write, but it's also the parents. Often the parent brings a child at 2 and is expecting, okay, my child is at school and I want my child to read and write and da-da-da. And you know, children develop at different paces, and you might have a child at 3 that is significantly beyond other 3 years old, and you need to be able to extend that child. But at the same time, generally speaking, the more they learn how to play, the stronger they can interact with other children, the emotions, the social interaction, the interpersonal skills, the taking turns, the dealing with their tantrums, that sort of thing is really a foundation to a happy child who's going to enjoy learning in the long run as well.
What is the worst thing that can happen as a result of skipping the developmental building blocks or stages that our guests have mentioned? In which ways can this gap, so to speak, manifest itself later in an individual's life?
You can get to a point where, let's say a child is having a problem at school. It could just be a minor issue such as handwriting, which is typically, we get a lot of children referred for handwriting issues. It could just be that simple. The child can't hold their pencil properly, they can't write properly. But maybe they're a very, very smart child, but they just can't get their thoughts on paper, they can't write properly. And that's something when they look at that handwriting and think, oh, I'm not clever enough, I'm not good enough. And they just start not liking school, not writing in class, behavior issues. You can get to a point where a child literally hates school and doesn't want to go to school, and that impacts on their future. So the earlier it is we pick up these issues, the earlier we work with them, the better outcome it is for the child, because it really affects your self-esteem as a child. If you see that you're having a problem in one area and all your peers and your friends are doing really well, they're doing much better than you, they're running better than you, they're doing better at PE, they're doing better at swimming, I'm not good at anything, I don't do this as well as the other child. So they take that on and their self-esteem is affected quite a lot.
Yeah, I think also that the main thing that in the long run will be affected is your self-esteem, your confidence levels, your own body image, the way you perceive yourself. And And I think indeed that not really enjoying what you're being taught at school, whereas learning is supposed to be fun and can be given to you at whatever level you're at within a classroom where differentiation takes place. So rather than giving the same material to everybody, if we can downgrade something or we can upgrade something for another child, if there is that flexibility within teaching generally, the child could still enjoy what they're doing. But I think in the long run, it's a lot of the self-esteem and the confidence levels.
And even for children born with physical disabilities, let's say a child born with CP, you don't do anything about it. You don't do physio, you don't do OT at those early stages. It's worse off for them. So whereas
they'll remain dependent
exactly.
on their environment.
Yeah. So this maybe could be a child that has potential to walk later on, but they might not even get to walking stage because they haven't had the therapy input. So what you do at the early stages really is what makes the difference. And if you can get them as early as possible and do a lot of input and keep pushing and pushing, what you can get out of them in terms of their function is huge. Yeah.
Or a child with autism who's extremely active or aggressive, if it's not dealt with or if they're not given the tools or the interventions or the strategies, they'll remain aggressive. They'll remain that because that is how they compensate with their bodies and themselves to try and make sense of the world around them. But if they're not being helped to do so, or if the parents are just not sure on how to deal with this, then you'll end up with an adult who's still got the same or similar traits.
And then a lot of these children with autism have a lot of sensory processing problems. So the brain is actually wired differently. And what we do is actually help them rewire the brain so that the brain works effectively, much better for them. So let's say this is a child with a lot of aggressive behavior, like Frida was saying. You can actually change that behavior through therapy intervention. And if you leave it like that, then it's never going to change. But if you work on it, then there's a lot that can change for that child. And you can actually get a child who's more functional and independent the older they get.
And become part of the society.
Exactly.
And work and be part within the Botswana workforce as well.
What best practices are we seeing in other countries in terms of child development systems and education?
I focused more on the European setup, and I know that in school settings, for example, there's a lot of emphasis on learning through play and movement in the early years. There are countries where they will not start learning to read and write until they're 7, sometimes 6. So they really focus on that foundation and building that foundation, after which they implement the more academic side, which then falls into place much easier. Because the child knows left from right and they've internalized it all. A child usually learns from the inside going out, so they need to first of all experience everything from the inside, and then they'll be able to put it all together afterwards.
And in terms of like the systems, the overall systems, like I worked in the UK for quite a while, and coming into Botswana, it's quite obvious that we don't have the support services for parents out there or for schools. Like in the UK, you have, let's say, a government will pay for your child to go through therapy. There are child development centers where occupational therapists, speech therapists, physios, psychologists all work under one roof. These are public services that are provided for children. Anyone with a problem walks in and they get their child sorted out through that center. So we don't have such a setup yet. OT here is either private, that's what we offer in terms of the school outreach programs, you can only get that through private OT, but OT in the mainstream healthcare service in the public setting is mostly in hospitals or rehabilitation or in the special schools. Actually, special schools don't really even get OTs. So in other countries where a child has a special need, the government will provide for that special need. It doesn't matter how many different therapists they need involved, the government actually provides for that child. So that's what we're still lacking here, and that's what we need to work towards, I think, in terms of our government and what we can do.
And I think also a lot of the countries outside included in the medical aid scheme. Occupational therapy is included in the Botswana medical aid scheme, but more for the pure physical medical type of scenarios, and to get our point across to say neurodevelopmental delays are also medical. We're not quite there yet. So we do get a lot of clients saying we can't claim, we have to pay for an assessment or for treatment, and yet we're not getting it back from medical aid. So we're still in a bit of a tug of war there, because it's just not considered medical enough, or yeah.
This is what I'm sure all the parents are waiting to hear. The number one thing you would love parents to understand about their children, or just advice you would have for every parent out there.
There's so much I could tell parents. I deal with parents on a daily basis, but I think always for parents, just understand that your child will never behave in a certain way without an underlying reason. And if you're concerned about that way, then ask yourself why possibly that child. And if you can't answer that, then seek help. There are people out there to support you. There are people out there to explain, to help you with strategies that fit into your home. And I also believe that there are no naughty children out there. Okay. So please don't label your child naughty or bad, or, you know, and the most is just spend time with your child, quality time. Even if you have 10 minutes a day, make those 10 minutes count, where it's just unconditional, love him, hug him, embrace him. He's the way he is, or she's the way he is, and make him the best that he or she can be. And that's what I would, in a nutshell.
Definitely, yeah. And in adding to that, I would say, listen to your children. Children know a lot. They are very perceptive. They can really, really tell you what's going on if you listen. And I think it's always, we tend to, as parents, look at children as, no, they're just kids, what do they know? But you can learn so much from a child. They can explain to you what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and it's just a matter of you sitting down with them and saying, but what would you like to do? How would you like the stage gone? If you think about it, really, parents, we control everything about our children. We decide when they're getting up, what they're eating, how they're dressing, when they're going to school, which schools they go to. They really have very little control in terms of their daily lives. And if we can just take that extra time to say, what would you like, in terms of offering very small choices, would you like this or would you like that? We need to get our children to tell us what they want as well, and we need to listen to that.
You've mentioned that parents may not understand the therapy you do because it looks like play. What can somebody who engages your services expect to see and do in this relationship?
Right, again, I think it depends on the goals that we're working at, but a typical 30-minute therapy session would include different activities which would emphasize the movement and the sensory for maybe 10 minutes, and then would maybe do a tabletop task which includes the fine motor skills, the fine motor, your arm and hand muscles. So we'd play a game, or we would use different Play-Doh or things to maybe find something. So we're using our hands. We could even go outside and spray the plants and get them to give them water or whatever. So a 30-minute session is usually split up into different sections, 10 minutes. It's got the movement, it's got the fine motor, and then often a perceptual skill, which includes a bit of more reasoning or thinking or matching or ordering things or using a sequence. So you're kind of covering all the different areas of that development. But depending on the emphasis for that individual child, you'll focus more on
a particular section.
Yeah. And some children can come in and need, maybe let's say, sensory integration therapy, and that is purely where you follow the child's lead. You bring them into a room like the big room we have, and if they gravitate towards the trampoline, we do the trampoline. If they gravitate towards the big ball, we do exercises on the big ball. So it's a lot about child-led therapy, because the theory behind it is that children actually know what they crave and what different inputs they crave. So you have to follow that around and sort of get them to do different things, but while they're interested, so you follow their interest around. And it's a lot about building that relationship. It's a lot about the interdependency as well. So it's a give and take relationship in the therapy. It's a lot of play. You have to motivate that child. They have to motivate it. It has to be normal. It has to be play and engaging and fun. And that's where we're coming from. And
adding to that, you basically set up a room with a whole lot of different activities or materials, and then which would, no matter which one they choose to go to, would bring about that intervention that they require. Yeah.
But every single thing that we do, there's a science behind it. There's a reason behind it. So it's not just about jumping up and down on the trampoline. When you're jumping up and down on the trampoline, you're stimulating certain receptors, you're working on balance, you're doing this. When you're going over the big physio ball, you're doing a different type of sensory input. When you're crashing on the big crash pad, you're getting a lot of feedback onto your body. So it's a lot about body awareness, knowing where you are in space. When you're crawling down on the floor, it's about coordination. It's about putting that weight on the shoulders, on the arms. So there's actually a science behind every single thing that we do, even though it's fun and it's play, but there's still a plan underneath it all.
You're analyzing.
We're over-analyzing everything. Yes.
You also mentioned hand splinting.
Yes.
Well, what would that
So
involve?
hand splinting is basically part of hand therapy. So for anyone that has any kind of hand injuries or let's say hand deformities, maybe let's say a child with cerebral palsy who's born with certain fixtures on their hands, you can actually gradually get that hand to be placed in the right position using splinting. Splinting is basically you're just using thermoplastic material. It's like plasticky material. You warm it up and then it can conform to a joint, and you can position that joint in the way that you want it to be positioned, and over time that helps gradually get the joint in the right position that you would like.
When you're doing the therapy, they're like, yeah, but you're just playing with the child, or you're just catching a ball with him, or whatever it is.
And then all of a sudden, I turned 2 years old. I
want to be the CEO of FNB so that I can become Mr. Boss.
Do not treat the child any different from any other child that you have.
It is now time for the stock market review, courtesy of the Botswana Stock Exchange.
Good evening. Last week's capital market statistics. The DCI, Domestic Company Index, was up 0.67% compared to the previous week, whilst the Foreign Company Index, FCI, was static for the week. Total turnover was 25.3 million pula, generated by 9.1 million shares, and the average daily turnover for the week was 5.1 million pula. For the year 2014 so far, the DCI is down 0.84% compared to an increase of 16.4% at this point last year. The Foreign Company Index, FCI, is however on the rise with a 0.14% increase compared to a dip of 0.95% at this point last year. Total turnover for 2014 is 806.8 million pula, much higher than last year's 509.8 million pula. And the total number of shares traded for 2014, 228.5 million shares compared to last year's 182.1 million shares. If you look at the exchange-traded funds, the Beta Beta ETF gained 1 pula 65 thebe to close the week at 42 pula 50, and the New Gold ETF was static for the week, but it closed trade at 108 pula 60 as it did the week before. That was your stock market review. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening.